host, Emerson Green. My guest today is Dr. Dustin Crummett. Dustin received a PhD from the University of Notre Dame in 2018, and he's currently working on animal ethics as a postdoc at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. He specializes in social and political philosophy, ethics, and philosophy of religion. In the description, I've linked a few other interviews with Dr. Crummett that I really enjoyed. Today, we talk about consciousness and his version of substance dualism, the advantages it has over materialism as well as other forms of dualism, some common objections to dualism, and a little about panpsychism and other alternatives. I really enjoyed speaking with Dustin, so without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Dr. Dustin Crummett. Okay, Dustin, it's nice to have you. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I've been more and more curious about dualism lately, and I wanted to flesh it out a bit as one alternative among others. So as for our organization, I wanted to split things into three parts: why not materialism, why dualism, and objections to dualism, which will take up the bulk of our time, I think. And if we have time, I'd like to hear your thoughts about idealism and panpsychism and dual aspect theories at the end. So materialism has very much been the zeitgeist of the past century or so. I think this has to do with technological advancement and the success of physical science more so than some rigorous philosophical argument for materialism. Many materialists, I think, don't realize that they're taking a metaphysical view that goes beyond the science, and that the neuroscience is metaphysically neutral in some respects. So I have arguments against materialism, or arguments for views that entail that materialism is false, like the vagueness argument or the intrinsic nature argument. But I'm curious why you hate science and why you don't accept the obvious truth of materialism.
Right. So I guess there are kind of maybe two broad classes of arguments against materialism that I'm sort of interested in. One class involves the nature of consciousness, and the other involves, you might say, something like the nature of conscious beings, the nature of subjects of conscious experience. So when it comes to arguments about the nature of consciousness itself, whether we should think that consciousness itself is a physical phenomenon, I think that, by and large, I'm going to be sympathetic to the sorts of standard arguments that are also employed by panpsychists like you, and so these sort of modal arguments. It seems like you could keep the physical facts fixed while varying the phenomenal facts, zombies or qualia inversion scenarios, things like this. The sort of vagueness argument that you're interested in. There may be some arguments for dualism about mental properties that at least many panpsychists can't run. So I think one problem for materialism is that it's actually pretty hard for materialists to avoid the conclusion that there are a vast number of different macrophysical conscious beings here, a vast number of different people, essentially all more or less having the same experiences as I am. And at least constitutive panpsychists might have some of the same problems with that. So Mørch has this paper called Is Consciousness Intrinsic? Problem for the Integrated Information Theory, where she lays out, she's not a dualist herself. She's arguing for a very specific sort of unusual form of panpsychism. Or maybe even not doing that, but she's laying out a couple options, and it sort of becomes clear that's the one that she thinks is best. But her version of the argument goes something like this. Whatever physical property is supposed to be identical to consciousness, or the reduction base for consciousness, or whatever. Maybe that's possession of integrated information, or a global workspace, or whatever. That's something that my brain currently has. right? My brain currently possesses whatever this property is. Well, think about my brain minus a neuron, some randomly selected neuron, or 2 randomly selected neurons, or 10 randomly selected electrons, or whatever. My brain minus that very, very small piece would still possess this property, right? It would still possess integrated information or a global workspace or whatever. Just like a sentence on a computer screen. If you removed 2 pixels, the sentence is going to remain legible, right? No matter which 2 pixels you remove. Well, this raises the question. Now let's think about my brain. The actual system that is my brain minus 2 randomly selected neurons, all of the neurons except for 2 of them. That possesses the property we thought that was identical to, or the reduction base or whatever, for consciousness. So why isn't that also conscious? And of course, that's not the same thing as my whole brain. My brain minus 2 neurons. It's not the same thing as my whole brain. If it's conscious on its own, then there are 2 distinct conscious individuals here. And of course, there's nothing special about those 2 particular neurons, so you get the view that there are a vast multitude of conscious neurons here, right? Or of different conscious beings here, right? One thing you might do is just accept that. Yeah, there are all these sort of subsets of the whole thing here that are also conscious. That's very counterintuitive. It might also have some kind of weird ethical implications. If you think, who should get the COVID vaccine first? Oh, well, this guy has a little bit more matter in his brain, so he has like way more conscious beings in there. We need to protect them. This is an argument Jonathan Simon gives that has these weird ethical implications. Alternatively, you might think, well, no, there's some sort of maximality condition on consciousness. There's something that ensures that only the whole system is conscious, right? Not just subsystems, even if those subsystems would be conscious on their own. So this is the integrated information theory has what's called the exclusion postulate, and that's the job that it does, more or less. So it's not enough that you have integrated information theory. You have to have the maximal degree out of, I think it's any of the systems that are part of you and any of the systems that you're part of. So parts of my brain or bigger things that I'm part of. Like the
ecosystem or a football team or something.
The German economy, the solar system. Those things possess some degree of integrated information too, but I'm part of them and my brain has more, so my brain is the conscious object, right? But that makes consciousness into an extrinsic property. So intrinsic properties are properties that just depend on how you are in and of yourself. Extrinsic properties depend partly on other things. So that has the implication that you could, if you incorporated my brain into a system that had a higher degree of integrated information than my brain has. So she gives this example of this sort of grid system where as you add more and more brains as nodes, the integrated information increases, and that's present in the whole system increases. So here's my brain, I'm having conscious experiences, whatever. You're off somewhere else, adding more brains, making this grid larger and larger. Eventually, somewhere on the other side of the solar system, you add the trillionth brain, and then suddenly, without my brain changing intrinsically in any way, without me changing intrinsically in any way, I cease being conscious. Mm-hmm. And that's very weird. But it's also, even if you bite that bullet, it's not totally clear that that helps with like the underlying many experiencers problem. Because at least on kind of a plausible view of what it would be for consciousness to be an extrinsic property, really what you're going to be saying is, look, there's the intrinsic thing that we thought was consciousness. Call that schmonsciousness. And then there's this extrinsic element. Mm-hmm. You need to have the highest degree of integrated information or the largest global workspace or whatever. But if that's right, it's not really clear that it's much less weird to say that there are vastly many schmontious beings here either, right? If they're all intrinsically identical, they're all intrinsically identical to some conscious agent. They would be conscious agents on their own. They just don't, because there's this further condition you need to meet to technically qualify as conscious. That might be equally weird. So it could be, it could be that we do just have a bunch of conscious beings within us.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's a theoretical cost, right? So a dualist can say, well, there's a causal relationship between whatever the neural correlates of consciousness are and the property of consciousness itself. But that's this further irreducible intrinsic property. And so if it turns out that the integrated information theory with the exclusion postulate is true, and I lose consciousness when you add the trillionth brain, that could happen, but that will at least mean that you're adding the trillionth brain caused an intrinsic change in me. It caused me to lose this irreducible intrinsic property that I possess. So you at least don't get this odd result that consciousness is this purely extrinsic affair. So there are some versions of panpsychism that can accommodate that too, but she argues kind of ordinary constitutive Russellian panpsychism can't. You wind up with the same problem as sort of ordinary materialism.
Yeah. Now I've seen because Hedda is an emergentist panpsychist, and I've seen constitutive panpsychists like Luke Roloff's actually kind of take that point and put it in the other direction, because sometimes physicalists will make similar points and say well, that's why we can't be panpsychists. And it's well, hang on, you kind of have this problem too. Certain aspects of the combination problem are also problems for reductive physicalism.
Yeah. So then the other set of considerations that lead me away from materialism have to do with the nature of conscious subjects. So I had the thought, because you have this vagueness argument, I had the thought that maybe this might be a line of reasoning that would appeal to you. So I guess your thought is that whatever the alleged property that we want to physical property that we want to identify with consciousness is, there will be vague or borderline cases of that, cases where either you have to say that this is determinately instantiated, but it seems really arbitrary to say that, or else you have to say it's vague or indeterminate or just a matter of convention, and consciousness isn't like that. It can't be vague or indeterminate or a matter of convention whether you're conscious. And so do I hear Leibniz's music coming in, right? So they can't be the same thing, right? There are a couple of sort of vagueness type arguments for various forms of substance dualism. So Peter Unger, who has no religious motivation or anything, he lays out this argument called the experiential problem of the many. So his thought is that physical objects have fuzzy boundaries, at the microphysical level. There's not any principled reason if you take some random electron that's about to fly off or something, that's on the very, very edge. Not any principled reason to say that is or isn't part of the cup. So you wind up with vastly many sets of particles that are equally good candidates for being the cup. And so if we say that any of them composes a cup, really we should say that all of them compose a cup. And so there are billions and billions of overlapping cups right here. And just ordinarily that just doesn't matter. He and I both think actually the better thing to do is to say that composition doesn't really occur. There aren't really such things as cups. But if you think it does occur, you should think it occurs for all of them. But then if we say that about whatever physical object I'm supposed to be, we again wind up with this view in which there are countless numbers of different experiencers present here. But a different, and this is the one that I thought maybe was more more directly relevant to your sort of argument. A different way, and I thought of this, I was reading Michael Huemer's new book, Knowledge, Reality, and Value. And he also he is a substance dualist, but he is also somebody with no religious motivation for it or anything. But you might think when we consider sort of Ship of Theseus type puzzles, you're going to wind up with what almost look like borderline cases of identity, right? When you switch out all of the pieces of Theseus' ship over the course of a year, is it the same ship at the end? Or suppose every time we switch it out, we also like change the configuration a little bit. And at the end of the year, there's a house. We've transformed the ship into a house. Well, is there some particular, like this was the board we changed where the ship stopped existing and the house began existing? Or were there like transitional forms? There were other objects like ship houses in the middle, or, that seems implausible to me. To think that there's some like deep fact about the world, mind-independent fact about the world that's like the determinate point at which the switch occurs. And so again, I think the moral winds up being there just aren't such things as ships. There are just collections of particles that are arranged shipwise. I'm a mereological nihilist. If you think that, then if you think that I exist, then I can't be any complex physical object. And so I'm some simple physical object, or I'm an immaterial object, right? But if you don't go the nihilist route, you might want to say that, well, it winds up being kind of vague or indeterminate or a matter of convention, whether we say that this is the ship in the middle of this process or not, the same object in the middle of this process or not. But of course, then you can run the same sort of argument with my brain or my body or whatever physical object you might think I am. You start replacing parts of it with computer chips or, stuff you cut out of somebody else's brain or whatever. At the end of this process, is that the same object? You might think, well, that's kind of going to be a matter of, it will be vague or indeterminate or a matter of convention. But I'm inclined to think it can't be vague or indeterminate or a matter of convention whether I exist and whether, a certain set of experiences is being had by me or by somebody else. And so the thought is, if there are composite objects, there might not be deep determinate facts about whether, my brain or my body survives a certain process. But there will always be deep determinate facts about whether I survive and I'm having conscious experiences at the end of it. So you have a similar sort of Leibnizian. So for instance, I was in class with Peter van Inwagen years ago when I was in graduate school. He's an animalist, so he thinks that I'm an organism. I'm this whole human organism. But the essential part of me is the brainstem, because that's the thing that regulates my vital functions. So he thinks if you replaced my brainstem with a mechanical replacement, then I would cease to exist. And I asked him, well, what if we did, consider like a series, you replace one cell with like a functionally isomorphic mechanical cell, or 2 cells, or 3 cells. When would I stop existing? And he said, it's indeterminate. And I said, what is it like for me when it's indeterminate whether I exist? And he said, it's indeterminate. And so you have indeterminacy of consciousness again, right? And I said, that can't be true. That doesn't make any sense. And he said, well, all philosophical views have costs. And then we started talking about something else. Some people will say I'm not a brain or a body. I am, my persistence conditions are psychological. And so what matters at the end of this series is not whether the brain or the body survived, but whether there's the right kind of psychological continuity. Then you run into some other problems. I mean, there may also be edge cases with psychological continuity. What counts as a sufficient degree of psychological continuity for me to survive or not survive. You also run into questions about, well, wait a minute, if I'm not my brain or my body, and you're a materialist, I'm not my soul. Well, what am I?
Mm-hmm.
Some people say I'm not anything. I'm a Humean bundle, right? Yeah. Just a collection. That doesn't seem right to me. Some people say that I'm a mind which is constituted by, but not identical to, my body or my brain. So I'm a material object, and I have I exactly overlap my brain, and I'm made out of all the same parts. But I'm not my brain. I'm different because I have different modal properties from my brain. That doesn't seem. That runs into other problems, I think. But psychological theories, at least sort of ordinary ones, also run into intrinsicality worries when it comes to identity, because, and this is true on some bodily theories too, but more obviously on psychological theories, you can wind up with cases where there are two equally good candidates for being me, and either of them on its own would be me, but they can't both be me. So what do we say about this? So some people think, for instance, that, if you scanned my brain in a way that destroyed it, but then you uploaded it to a computer, you uploaded the scan to a computer and emulated my brain, then I would survive that, because the emulated person would be psychologically continuous with me in the right way, right? People get teleporter cases. I step into a teleporter on Earth and my body is destroyed, but a new body is made for me out of new matter on Mars, and this person is psychologically continuous with me. They think I would survive that. But you can imagine the teleporter malfunctions and it sends one beam to Mars, but it also sends another beam to Venus. And now there are two psychologically continuous people who come out. I can't be both of them, so which one am I? And typically people say, well, okay, so we need a closest continuer condition or a non-branching condition. So in this case, when there are two equally good candidates, I'm not either one of them. But that's very weird, because just like it's weird for consciousness to be intrinsic, it's weird for personal identity to be weird for consciousness to be extrinsic. It's weird for personal identity to be extrinsic in this way. So it seems to me, the person on Mars would have been me, except that without changing anything about the person on Mars, this other thing happened on Venus, right? There's this other guy. But how can whether the other guy is on Venus affect whether this person, who intrinsically has everything that it takes to count as me, is me or not? So you might anyway, maybe that was a bit rambly, but my thought is you run into the same sorts of arbitrariness or vagueness or whatever. It doesn't seem like there's a deep determinate fact about whether ordinary objects survive certain sorts of transformations. But it seems like there must be a deep determinate fact about whether I survive those transformations. So I must not be an ordinary object. Maybe I'm some sort of not very ordinary object with psychological persistence conditions, but it's not clear that that helps so much, and that might cause other problems too. So that's sort of the structure of the argument.
Yeah, I was never that interested in composition until I realized its relevance to consciousness. Like, if you are some kind of mereological nihilist, which seems to be kind of the default position for a lot of materialists, then phenomenal unity and certain aspects of identity do become much harder to explain. But with identity, okay, so it sounds like the disadvantages of materialism and the advantages of dualism, as far as you're concerned, have to do with consciousness and identity. And I'm going to link a couple of videos where you talk about identity in more detail, because I don't have super strong intuitions about identity like that. I have a couple here and there. I think that an essential part of me is my subjective point of view. But beyond that, I don't really know what I know that I would not get into the Star Trek transporter because it's a murder machine. And even if there is some kind of psychological continuity, my point of view would come to an end and a different point of view would come to be, and they would have all my memories and stuff, and they wouldn't be able to tell that they weren't me, but I think they wouldn't be me in some sense.
I think I'm fine with all that. Do you agree that there will always be some kind of determinate objective fact about whether your point of view is still around or your point of view.
Yeah. Like those vagueness arguments are interesting to me, but I feel like a lot of their import is carried over from my existing feelings about like the vagueness of phenomenal consciousness, or rather the precision of phenomenal consciousness. So yeah, like my vagueness arguments just have to do with experience, where it's like, reductive materialists think that experience emerged weakly in the same way that like liquid emerged or a chair emerged. So weak emergence is usually vague, especially up here, in kind of the macrobiological realm where consciousness is supposed to have emerged. But the emergence of consciousness couldn't have been vague because it has this property of precision. So if all weak emergence is vague, and if the emergence of experience couldn't have been vague, then it wasn't the product of weak emergence. So reductive materialism is out. And the other vagueness argument that I like to make is just that it's just an arbitrariness consideration. Like any point you pick where phenomenal consciousness is supposed to spring into existence is going to feel totally arbitrary. Like it could, like, okay, where like 25,017 neurons, like why not 25,018? Like it just seems like any point you pick is going to be arbitrary, because again, this is not like a heap of sand or something. Like this is different from all those from all the other examples. Like with a chair, you could continually deform a chair until it wasn't really clear whether it was a chair or not, and that's fine, I think. But it's not fine with phenomenal consciousness, because it's either like something to be or it's not, and there's no borderline case of phenomenal consciousness. So I think that's a huge issue for reductive materialists. If it's not an argument that just shows that it's false, it's a huge anomaly, at least, because it's not like, the emergence of experience couldn't have been like other cases of weak emergence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that all seems right to me. My thought is that applying the same sorts of thoughts to this question about whether your point of view survives might motivate.
Right.
Some sort of
I don't know what I think about the subject of experience. Like, that's something I need to think more about, because I'm not sure if you're able to collapse those things, the experiences and the subjects. Like, again, I don't really have strong views about this, but like that's the move that Galen Strawson makes. Like he thinks there's just like, these things are just identical, like the subject and the experience and stuff. And it leads to weird things about the self. But it's like, okay, so you mentioned Mike Humer a second ago, and I just kind of guessed he was a substance dualist, because part of the reason that part of my recent interest in dualism has been driven in part by being more interested in preserving the manifest image and doing as little violence to our intuitions as possible. Like, I think that that's, a worthwhile consideration. And like dualism seems to have that going for it more than any other idea of consciousness. So if you're at all attracted to the epistemological view of phenomenal conservatism, and, I haven't made my mind up in that area, but if you think phenomenal conservatism is a pretty good idea in epistemology, then dualism is sort of the default view until you've been given some pretty good reasons for thinking otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's certainly the view that people naturally hold, and that probably the vast majority of people have held, throughout history, dualism of some sort or another. That's... And I guess, so let's think about this. I am sort of attracted to phenomenal conservatism, but that's never really played much of a role in me being a dualist. Why is that? Maybe I don't have a good reason for that. Maybe I should add that to my list of reasons for being a dualist. I don't know.
Anyway, I just think that that's one consideration. That's one big reason that I'm starting to think about it a little bit more. But I also just think that the fact that dualism allows you to say that, phenomenal states are not like fully reducible to material states, like that's another huge advantage of dualism. Like, because I think that's a part that's basically not moving for me. So it's like, I'll explore idealism, I'll explore, all different kinds of panpsychism and dualism. But if anything asks me to believe that phenomenal states are just fully reducible to material states, I think that's going to be something that just doesn't really compute with me, and I'm just going to have to reject that view.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the doubt argument? I'm not sure that it works, but I just think it's a nice little argument. Just Descartes' idea that you can doubt the existence of basically everything except your own mind, including your body. So they can't be identical because you can doubt one, but you can't doubt the other. And identical things share all their properties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess so. That way of putting it can't quite be right, or it needs further premises or something like that. Because in intentional contexts, you can have this sort of doubt. So I could doubt, whether Superman has heard my cry for help, even though I see Clark Kent over there just heard me, and for some reason he's running into a phone booth, because I don't recognize that Clark Kent and Superman are the same person, right? So I can have doubt about one and not doubt about the other, or at least I can have doubt about one and not the other, even though they're the same person, actually, right? And so I take it the materialist should say, in that sort of case, well, as long as I have like different terms or different concepts or whatever of myself and my body or my brain or whatever I'm supposed to be, as long as I don't realize that these are actually the same thing in reality, I might have doubts. You couldn't literally have doubts about one and not about the other because they are the same object. But I can have doubts, employing the term me that I don't have about my body or whatever, or vice versa, employing the term my body. This is sort of a broader part of this broader class of conceivability arguments, though. It seems like I can conceive of myself existing without a body. And if it's really possible for me to exist without a body, then it follows that I'm at least not identical to my body, right? Or to my brain or whatever. There is, I take it, there's some sort of connection between conceivability and possibility. Some sort of like connection, at least, between conceivability, some sort of idealized conceivability and possibility. So maybe it's at least some evidence that I can conceive of existing without my body. It's a little different, property dualists or generally people arguing against reductivism about consciousness employ similar conceivability arguments about zombies and qualia inverts and things. And I said that I liked those arguments a minute ago. It's a little bit different because there what I'm imagining is, sort of the properties being distributed in certain ways. When I have when I'm conceiving of myself existing without a body, I'm not just conceiving of that. I'm trying to conceive of something happening to a certain specific concrete object. It's not enough that I imagine somebody just like me existing without a body. I have to really be imagining me existing without a body for this to be relevant. And I take it that the standard materialist response is, okay, even if this sort of thought experiment shows that somebody, having your thoughts and whatever could exist without a body, it doesn't show that you, the specific concrete person, could exist without a body. It might be that you are essentially material. And what you're really conceiving of is sort of a doppelganger who happens not to be essentially material. And I don't know quite what I think about that, but I think that's serious enough that I don't put a huge amount of weight on that sort of argument.
Yeah, conceivability arguments, like the inverted qualia, I think is a pretty good argument. But like when it comes to, like zombie arguments and stuff, I always just get scared off because at first it seems like, oh yeah, this is just obviously true. Of course this works. And then they're just like, well, do you buy into Kripkean semantics? And I'm just like, I don't know. And then I just like, Yeah, it ends up into too deep of a conversation for my interest or ability when we start. Like it seems like a good argument to me, and then people start making these objections that I don't really understand, and then I just have to tell them, like, okay, I just won't use that one.
Yeah. It definitely, yeah. I mean, you get into very technical stuff about the relation of conceivability to possibility, and that gets you into two-dimensional semantics and Kripkean semantics and all that sort of stuff. Chalmers has a good paper where he lays out some of the relevant stuff. I think it might be called the two-dimensional argument against materialism or something. Where he surveys some of the relevant background stuff. But
so, if my cat will stop meowing, so I wanted to talk about Phineas Gage. So this is something that materialists bring up all the time. There was this guy who lost a decent chunk of his prefrontal cortex in a freak accident where a rail spike blew straight through his head, but he lived, and he changed dramatically after the accident. He lost a lot of function. We now know is associated with the prefrontal cortex, like impulse control and planning. So this story illustrates, one of the more popular objections to dualism, that there's just this intricate correlation between brain states and mental states, where if there really is, a distinct substance where, reasoning and experiencing take place, and this substance is not dependent on the brain for anything besides moving a body like a marionette, then we should expect those things to be, impervious to brain manipulations to some extent. But that's not the case. We can alter our experience and reasoning faculties by altering the brain with drugs or lack of sleep or electromagnetic stimulation. And so this is a problem for substance dualism, but not really for property dualism. So,
yeah.
So how do you handle this sort of neural dependence Phineas Gage sort of argument?
Yeah. So I mean, of course, you don't really need neuroscience or Phineas Gage or whatever to. I mean, the basic point, I think, is one that people have always understood. You can find ancient medical texts that talk about. I mean, people in ancient Greece or whatever were aware that if you got kicked in the face by a donkey, your cognitive ability might decline. So it's not like this is a new problem for dualists to contend with or something. But yeah, I mean, I think I think the thing to say is just, well, what this shows us is that your soul is not just totally autonomous and only depends on your body to move around like a marionette. There's some sort of tight connection between what your soul is able to do and your body, so that it requires a functioning brain to have experiences and think thoughts and so on. Why is that? I mean, there are different people who have put forward models. There are some people who are emergent dualists, for instance, who think somehow actually your brain and your nervous system generates the soul, and somehow the soul mirrors them in some way, and that explains the dependence better allegedly than kind of old-fashioned Cartesian dualism. I don't quite know what to say about all that. I do think that it has to be an argument of some force against substance dualism, just because if you think about it in Bayesian terms or whatever, if you just have the view that I'm an immaterial substance, it could have been that when I die, I just float around like a ghost or whatever, and am unchanged except for the fact that I don't have a body anymore. Or maybe I don't have sensory impressions, but I can still do math and think of it. Or if I get really badly brain damaged, then none of my cognitive faculties change, even if I get frustrated because I can't sense things. That could have been true if dualism was true. That couldn't be true if materialism or property dualism or whatever was true. And so in Bayesian terms, yeah, that has to be an argument of some force against substance dualism. I don't think it's an argument of overwhelming force. I think the conclusion to draw is just, well, okay, it turns out that somehow or other, my soul depends upon my brain to be able to do stuff. And there are different speculative models we have about why that might be. You do take a hit to the cost of the theory because you have to introduce this other stuff that otherwise would have been ad hoc or whatever. But sometimes that's just what you have to do, you know.
So you're right that in Bayesian terms, because this is to be expected on materialism or property dualism, but is less expected on substance dualism than it is, evidence that favors, however slightly, these other views over substance dualism, because there could have been a complete independence between mind and body here. So we'll concede that point, but it doesn't mean that it can't be explained. So these sorts of correlations, dualists know about them, as you said, and they have for a while. So anyway, I guess, how would you explain it? If someone just, keeps pointing out, well, hang on, if I change this part of the brain, then I change this part of your experience.
Yeah, I mean, of course, sort of you're right. You can't infer identity just immediately from the correlation, right? You change lots of stuff about me if you mess around with my brain enough. You can stop me from digesting food, but that doesn't mean that those are just brain processes, right? So I mean, it's not like you immediately perceive identity or something like that. Now, so I want to say that there's a causal relationship, even though there's not identity. Why is there that causal relationship? Well, again, I mean, we have different models. There are various forms of emergent dualism. It might be that this is just what the form that the psychophysical laws take. I think that they're just like there are natural laws that govern interactions between physical things. There are other natural laws that govern psychophysical interactions. Why are the psychophysical laws like that? Well, I guess, whatever the general answer, the general answer you have about why are the natural laws the way they are will be the answer you give about the psychophysical. And maybe that's the way God wanted them to be. Maybe they're brute facts. I mean, there are different ways. Robin Collins has this paper called A Scientific Case for the Soul, where he has I think he thinks that your brain actually supplies your soul with energy somehow or something. I don't quite know what I think about that, but I mean, I don't think that we know enough to give any detailed answer. We have various toy models that I think show how it might work. I don't know what the actual right answer is, but I think we have speculative answers that are good enough. And so what I would say as well, I guess, one or another of these or something else that I haven't thought of yet is the case.
Yeah, but it's it's not like every time there's a new interaction, or I mean a new correlation between mind and body that's discovered. It's not just another nail in the coffin for substance dualism. Like I said, dualists are aware of the correlation, the very tight correlation between mind and brain.
Yeah, I mean, even Descartes, who is alleged to be, the mind-brain separator par excellence, says, I'm not in my body like a pilot in a ship. They're integrated as if they were one thing, blah, blah, blah. Everybody has always known that there was this tight relationship. Everybody's always known that dualists had to explain this tight relationship somehow. We know more about the exact details of the tight relationship. Maybe in the old days we didn't know, this specific area of the brain is correlated with language use or whatever.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know. I guess that's...
Well, okay, so that brings us to the next part, which is interaction. So common sense tells us that mind and body interact. I look for food because I'm hungry. I recoil because I'm in pain. Likewise, if my body is altered, my mind will change along with it. So there appears to be this back and forth interaction between mind and body. And one objection is that different substances would lack the communality necessary for interaction. So this interaction wouldn't be like physical matter influencing other physical matter. It would be physical matter being influenced by mind stuff and mind stuff exerting influence over physical matter. So, so what do you say to the interaction problem?
Yeah, I've never been able, honestly, to see what the problem there is. I do think that there are some, like the dependent stuff. I mean, that is some evidence for against substance dualism. But no, this I've never been able to figure out what the problem is. I mean, the problem dates at least back to Princess Elizabeth, and when Princess Elizabeth raised this objection to Descartes, it was clear what the problem was. Descartes and other people who were into the mechanistic philosophy had this picture of physical causation, according to which it was always a matter of like things pushing against each other.
Yeah,
and
contact mechanics.
Contact mechanics. The effect could always be derived from like the shape and velocity and so forth of the one object and the other. And it was supposed to be some sort of a priori truth that the effect would follow given these facts, like an a priori necessity or something. And given that, you can see what the problem is, right? Well, souls don't don't literally push stuff around in the way that, my hand can push stuff around. So it can't work like that. So how does it work, right? I take it that now we know that like that picture is not true. We know scientifically that there's all sorts of non-local causation, or even to the extent that it's controversial whether there's non-local causation. No physicist thinks it's like a priori known that there can't be non-local causation. And we also know from Hume and other people that, well, no, it's actually not an a priori necessity anyway, that the one billiard ball hitting the other causes it to go off in the same direction. Anything whatsoever is conceivable when that happens, right?
Right.
And we can't really say very much that's informative about why. Well, I mean, I guess you can point to mechanisms, right? You can kind of break things down into their constituent parts. If I wonder, why does touching the trackpad move the cursor on my screen? You can tell me some story about the internal working of the computer. And I ask, well, why does that bring about the effect? You can tell me some story about the internal working of the components of the computer and so forth. But when we get down to the basic level, what can you do? You can cite laws, you can appeal to causal powers, you can say, that's just how it is, I don't know what to tell you. And I take it that's what the dualist has to say too, right? This is a sort of another form of basic causation. It's not via some sort of mechanism. In principle, yeah, I think that there are laws governing it. I don't know what the laws are. In principle, you can cite laws, you can appeal to causal powers, you could say, well, I don't know what to tell you, it's just how things are.
And if they have a problem with that, it's like, well, I mean, if they have a problem with that, it's like, well, I mean, physical stuff doesn't meet this burden. Like, it's not mechanical, then it's not a real explanation. It's like, the mechanical sorts of explanations have been out in physics for a long time.
Yeah. So I don't see. I guess the question is, what is the reason for accepting this commonality claim? They don't have the right kind of commonality. Of course, they have some kind. They're both concrete objects. They share some properties. They don't share others. That's true of everything. Why is it really what the person is saying is they think that only physical things can have physical effects, I guess, or can interact with other physical things. And I don't know why would I accept that? We can see why Elizabeth accepted it. I don't think we have any reason to accept it anymore.
There's actually a really interesting quote from Noam Chomsky that I want to read about Newton that you might be familiar with. He says, "The properties of matter, Newton showed, escape the bounds of the mechanical philosophy. To account for them, it is necessary to resort to interaction without contact. Not surprisingly, Newton was condemned by the great physicists of the day for invoking the despised occult properties of the neo-scholastics. Newton largely agreed. He regarded action at a distance, in his words, as so great an absurdity that I believe no man who has in philosophical matters a competent faculty of thinking can ever fall into it. Newton, however, argued that these ideas, though absurd, were not occult in the traditional despised sense. Nevertheless, by invoking this absurdity, we concede that we do not understand the phenomena of the material world. To quote one standard scholarly source, by understand, Newton still meant what his critics meant, understand in mechanical terms of contact action. End quote. So, I think that has obvious implications for the interaction problem. Like if something that's today regarded as meat and potatoes science, like Newtonian physics, was originally taken to be spooky and occult, then why should we rule out mind-body interaction because it would seem spooky and just not involve contact mechanics? The contact mechanical view has been dead for centuries, arguably. So why should we expect an account of mind-body interaction that, physics doesn't live up to, even Newtonian physics doesn't live up to it?
Yeah, I think that's all right.
So I want to play a clip from a YouTuber named ShannonQ. It's about 2 minutes, and I'll play it at 1.5 speed. It's a style of objection that I think has a lot of force for people because it leans on like the impressive precision of neuroscience and how any talk of the soul sort of feels out of place. We've sort of covered some of this, and I'm sure we'll cover more of it as we get into like physical causal closure and stuff. But I think she gives voice to how a lot of materialists feel about dualism. And I actually think there are a few objections here that could be teased apart, but I'll just play the clip first and give you a chance to respond.
So in order for that to take place, a mitochondria in your cell needs to produce a chemical called ATP. Now that chemical, that ATP chemical, is open a channel in the membrane of that neuron cell, and the configuration of sodium and potassium ions on either side of that cell needs to be such that there's a differentiation that causes that cell to require equilibrium. And when that ATP opens the channel, then the sodium and potassium ions travel across that channel until they reach a specific configuration. And at that point, when they reach that specific configuration, that neuron hits their action potential ratio and the neuron fires.
That's now complicated.
Not really. Like
sounds complicated. So
it's not that complicated. It's a little complicated, right. But essentially what it means and what did it for me when I realized that was if I think that my soul, like we all, even an apologist will admit your brain does a thing, right? Like it's done some kind of thing. Like we talked about Phineas Gage before.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about Phineas Gage because it's epic.
Yes, it is. It's pretty good. That's another one that was like a chink in the armor for sure. But this one was like a nail in the coffin for me. When I realized that in order for me to have any thought in my head, in order for me to make any sort of movement in my body, in order for me to even have the deliberation about whether or not I had a soul, this needed to happen. And this was a very physical process. So it's very physical. Like at what point would my soul would have to come in with little sodium potassium ion tweezers and put them in the correct configuration on either side of my neuronal cell membrane and then squeeze my mitochondria to get the ATP to come out to open the channel in order for that specific configuration to reach a diffusion ratio to travel across the membrane of that neuron so that neuron could fire to even start having the thought about this conversation. I just realized like there's no room for that in there. And also it's unnecessary.
Right.
It's not necessary. So I would be pushing a soul in there where no soul is needed.
Okay. So what do we think about that?
I guess, what do you think the objection there is?
I think
there maybe are a couple ways of interpreting it.
Yeah. I think that there's an arbitrariness objection. Like, where exactly does the soul fit into this process? Like, does it just interact with the sodium but not the potassium or something? Like, and then there's a sort of interaction thing. Like, I think she said, like mental tweezers. She said something about tweezers. It's unnecessary. Don't multiply entities if you don't have to. And then I think that the main part was just physical causal closure. Like we have a complete physical account of what's happening. Like we understand every little step of the way here. And so why insert something else? And further, where are you going to insert it? Like we have a pretty detailed, like in the grand scheme, it's actually not that detailed, but it seems pretty detailed. And it's just like, where does a soul play a role in this process that we know about? And why would you want to add one?
Yeah. So I guess, maybe we can try to take one at a time. As far as the necessity consideration, I guess, I mean, there are people who have been dualists without being interactionists. And maybe, if it turns out that we live under the pre-established harmony or something, I don't know, maybe that's not the end of the world. That's kind of cool too. Yeah, I mean, on the assumption that there is mental causation, well, the necessity would come from the thought that, well, we have these other reasons to believe in a soul. And we believe in mental causation, and so must intervene somewhere. Where in that process does it intervene? Well, of course, I don't have any idea. And no, I mean, you couldn't expect anyone to have any idea. I mean, we don't have, some complex molecule by molecule map of what my brain is doing all the time. So yeah, I mean, somehow if my soul is causally responsible for me doing things, then it has to cause neurons to fire. Where in the process does it do something that affects the action potential of a neuron or something? I think we don't know yet. You might think that the fact that, well, we haven't found any need to posit that so far, that's evidence that it's not doing anything. And that, again, I mean, maybe there would be, maybe in Bayesian terms, that's like some evidence at least. It could have been that we found that there were like big measurable energy influxes in my pineal gland or something, whenever I had to make a decision. And we don't find that. I mean, that's some evidence against interaction. I don't think it's decisive because, again, we just don't. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff we don't know about what's happening in my brain. We can't actually map, according to the ordinary laws of physics. When would this neuron be firing, and when would this? We don't know any of that stuff. And so, if our soul was interacting in a fairly subtle way, which it might have to be to not like screw things up or whatever, right? Then I don't really know that we have super strong reason to think that neuroscience would have noticed that.
Right. Yeah.
In principle, it would be possible to notice that. I don't know if it will ever be physically feasible or not for us to notice that. But
yeah. Well, I mean, I would reject her claim that there's nothing for non-physical experience to do there. I'm like, wait, did I like fall asleep and miss the part where we explained phenomenal consciousness? Like, yeah, I understand that, like, there's this very, this very complex series of physical interactions going on in the brain, but like, you can always ask, no matter how much detail you give, you can always ask, why is it like something to undergo those physical processes? Like, just giving me more and more, publicly observable third-person description, this objective description of what matter is doing, is arguably never going to yield like the kind of explanation that someone would want for phenomenal consciousness and subjective experience. Like, it just seems like it's the wrong kind of tool. It's like trying to explain like mass in terms of charge or something, or trying to explain concreta in terms of abstracta. Like, it just seems like, to be honest, like, you're never just going to give me more and more and more neuroscientific description and suddenly, oh, that's where phenomenal consciousness comes from. Like, I just don't think that, like, I think there are in principle reasons to think that this sort of description isn't going to explain phenomenal consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I agree with that. Maybe one way to think about it is just, so if we agree that like physicalism is otherwise satisfactory, there would be no reason to posit interaction. But of course, everyone agrees with that, right? Or I mean, maybe some people, they think that they have to believe that you have a soul because it says so in the Bible or something like that. But I mean, in general, of course, if you think that physicalism is otherwise totally satisfactory, you shouldn't just throw a soul in there just to have one. If you think that it's not, then you have to posit. And of course, I mean, the mental causation problem is not just a problem for substance dualists, it's also a problem for property dualists, and at least some panpsychists. Panpsychists have some other options maybe, but and once you accept the idea that consciousness is not physically reducible, you have to either be an epiphenomenalist or say that there's interaction somehow or other. And maybe both of those are weird in their own ways. But
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if my options are between interaction and my experiences have no causal effects, then I think I'm just going to say, yeah, it's interaction. And there's like, yeah, there's something weird here, but you know, it would be even weirder saying that my experiences have no causal effects. Like I can't really, it's just very hard for me to like take epiphenomenalism seriously because it feels sort of like illusionism in that it just contradicts a datum. And it's just like kind of a non-starter. But I also just think, I mean, I don't think that a dualist would be that sympathetic to what I'm going to say here, but I think that Bertrand Russell's work in the analysis of matter is crucial for understanding why I'm not going to change my mind when I'm just given more and more detailed physical descriptions of the brain. Like, I think physical science tells us about structure and behavior, and it can't tell us, even in principle, whether the intrinsic nature of matter is or isn't experiential. So I think that the information we get from physical science is in some important sense limited. It just tells us about structure. Yeah. And I don't think that consciousness...
I think I agree with that.
Oh, okay, cool.
And that's part of the reasoning, or I mean, that's part of the motivation behind, zombie arguments and things like that, is this thought that, look, however we fill in the details of the physical findings about my brain and so forth, we know generally the sort of details they are. They're in terms of structural dynamic properties, and we, at least allegedly, can see that, no collection of these structural dynamic properties are ever going to yield subjective or necessitate subjective experience.
Right.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I don't agree that the intrinsic nature of matter is consciousness. So that's where I part with the Russellian monist.
So I wanted to move on to physical causal closure. We've kind of been like orbiting around it anyway, but like there's a complete physical. Well, how would you characterize physical causal closure? Because the nature of it, I think, is maybe a little disputed, and certainly the motivations for it are disputed. Like, it's not really clear to me that there's like a really good argument for physical causal closure, as opposed to just taking it as like a consequence of physicalism.
Yeah, there are different ways of defining it. I mean, the thought is something like physical effects only have physical causes, or something like that, or they always have sufficient physical causes, or whatever. Somehow or other, the causal explanation of whatever happens in the physical world is going to be solely in terms of other physical causes. Or, it's a little. I mean, Korsgaard at one point says about people who believe in moral error theory that they've been left in the room with the modern scientific worldview for too long. They just sometimes when you hear appeals to the causal closure of the physical, it feels a little like that. It's not like there's any argument given for it. It's just like, come on, like science, like about science, and like it's not, and you can kind of feel the force of like, oh yeah, science. But like, it's not. That's not an argument. It's just like an ethos, So like, I don't know. I mean, what are the arguments for causal closure? I guess. I mean, you might think that there's a kind of inductive argument for it, I guess. Like, well, we've explained all these other things in terms of purely physical causes. So probably the stuff that's left is explainable in terms of purely physical causes. Of course, the dualist will say, well, but inductive inferences are only as good as your reasons are to think that, like, what's remaining is not relevantly different from what you've already observed. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. If we already have reason for thinking that there's non-physical stuff, then it's just like, it doesn't really work.
Yeah. No, nobody I've met in Germany was wearing an orange jumpsuit. So probably the people in the prison aren't wearing an orange jumpsuit either. Well, that's a bad inductive inference.
Right.
And yeah, so if you're a dualist and you're an interactionist dualist, then you're going to think, well, the brain might be relevantly different because that's the site of interaction with this non-physical thing. Yeah, so I'm not so moved by that. I mean, except maybe on an emotional, I can feel emotionally the force of like science.
Science. Ever heard of it?
Yeah, right. Yeah, what are other arguments? I mean, sometimes people will appeal to like conservation of energy and that sort of stuff. Daniel Dennett gives kind of I guess this is supposed to be an argument. He, in Consciousness Explained, he says, well, look, think about Casper the Ghost. Like, Casper the Ghost, he can like pick stuff up, but he can also go through walls. Like, how does that make any sense? Like, why doesn't the stuff fall through his hand if he can pass through walls? So, like, how about that? Okay. This is supposed to illustrate that, like, we don't have I don't know what it's supposed to illustrate. But yeah, I mean, it often, yeah, I think it must be a sort of inductive argument.
I've heard sometimes like, well, look, science wouldn't work if physical causal closure weren't true.
Yeah, well, I mean, you wouldn't be able to explain all the stuff that we've explained in terms of physical causes if physical causal closure weren't true.
Right.
Would any of the science that has worked so far not work if, my brain causes neurons to fire, or my soul causes neurons to fire sometimes? I guess I don't think so. Maybe it's a good methodological principle if you're a scientist to always assume that the physical is causally closed. Maybe the fact that it is a good methodological principle provides some evidence for like the metaphysical equivalent, because like maybe it would seem like a coincidence otherwise or something.
Right. No miracles sort of thing.
Yeah.
It does just seem though to me, it seems like it's like physical causal closure. It seems like the wrong sort of thing to appeal to justify physicalism. Like it feels like they're grabbing the wrong end of the stick in some ways, where it's like, look, if physical. Yeah. Like if physicalism is true, then physical causal closure is true. But like they're appealing to physical causal closure like it's a datum that we all recognize. And it's just like, when did we observe physical causal closure to be true? I didn't get the memo on that one. So there's sort of a more specific version of the causal closure argument, which is just sort of an argument from the core theory. So substance dualists are essentially postulating a non-physical particle that routinely influences physical particles, but we don't see any evidence that the standard model of particle physics is incomplete when it comes to, our everyday lives. So if there were this stuff that routinely influenced matter, then you wouldn't expect all these controlled experiments we've performed to fail to detect what's, essentially a very influential particle. So if this stuff does somehow interact with matter, then why haven't we found evidence for it in experiments?
Yeah. So I guess, maybe to some extent, this is just a special case of the prior worry. And so what I'll be saying is just a special case of what I said about the prior worry. So the dualist doesn't think that your soul is just moving stuff around randomly all the time. It thinks it, interacts very specifically in this one particular type of system. So like most of our experiments, it wouldn't have any impact at all. So that's the answer to why we haven't found anything. Why haven't we found any interaction in the brain? Well, because brains are like the most complicated thing in the universe, and there's lots of stuff we don't know about them. And again, you can't actually predict according to the laws of physics when each neuron's going to fire and whatever. So presumably the answer there will just be, well, the effects are subtle and brains are really complicated. You can't measure everything happening in them, even in principle, and you also have to kill the person to measure some things. And so I take it that something like that is is the answer. Again, there may be a little evidence, this sort of Bayesian argument, maybe you would have if souls existed. Maybe we might have found their effects. It could be that we observe things that were otherwise inexplicable happening physically. So maybe that we have some evidence. But yeah, I don't think it's like wildly strong evidence.
It's just kind of like, well, why would the soul be exerting influence over little particles in a particle collider?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand. Like, it felt like a naive objection when I first thought of this. I'm like, well, we haven't like stuck anyone's head in there, have we? Like, that would seem unethical, and they'd probably die or something. And it's like, well, that's where the interaction is occurring. It's not just like the soul's floating around just pushing the particles in a particle collider, and it seems like that's where the evidence is coming from.
Yeah.
So, anything else to say about that one before we move on?
Not really.
So this objection is very annoying to me. It's just the vitalism objection. Why isn't believing in a soul just like believing in a non vital? Like there's some kind of, vital spirit that's moving around, physical things. And I thought that Chalmers put this to rest 25 years ago in The Conscious Mind, but people just keep talking about it like he didn't do that. And, they don't really address his criticisms. They just keep saying oh, non vital, we thought that there was this, life force. We were wrong. So why aren't you wrong about there being, mind stuff, I guess, influencing some physical stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a little hard. I mean, how would one go about trying to, because stated like that, the argument is obviously terrible. Well, this other thing didn't exist, so this thing probably don't work. Okay. Maybe, again, this is a sort of inductive, we have these prior cases where we thought something was irreducible, and then it turned out that it wasn't, or whatever. I guess I think in the case of dualism, we really do have, or at least in the case of, let's say, anti-reductionism, we really do have kind of in principle reasons to think that the reduction is not going to work. It's not just that we haven't chipped away at it long enough or something, but as it seems like the nature of the things that science is telling us is not going to address the hard problems and the other related issues. There's also, insofar as this is supposed to be some kind of inductive argument from, the past success of scientific reductions or whatever. One point that some people have made is that, to a large extent, in the past, scientific reductions have worked by kind of separating out the secondary qualities from the thing that you're trying to reduce. So the felt experience of wetness, well, that's not part of the water. That's just part of your mind. So don't worry about that. The felt experience of heat, that's not part of the phenomenon itself. That's part of, you're projecting it. So don't worry about that. To a large extent, scientific reductions have succeeded by bracketing questions about, the subjective elements of all these phenomena, or saying that's not part of the physical phenomena, that's part of that's happening in your soul or whatever. So then when you get to the question of, okay, can we reduce can we reduce all the things that we bracketed because they were too hard to reduce? Well, you might think that is going to be that's another reason to doubt whether the inductive inference here is good, right? We've sort of shunted off all the secondary qualities. Then we think, but we can reduce. Can we reduce the felt experiences here too? It's a little bit like if you went through the Sudoku book and you skipped all the hard ones and you just did the easy ones, and then you thought, so clearly I can do the hard ones because I've succeeded at all the ones I've tried so far, right? Well, no, that's not a representative sample. Yeah. I do think that there are kind of other reasons to be doubtful about the kind of the literal answer to the non vital question is just, well, there are different theories and we have better reasons in the case of dualism. But insofar as it's this general worry about kind of the inductive success of reductions, I think we have in principle reasons to think there's not going to be a reduction, and I think there's a little funny business going on with the telling of the history that goes into the induction, because the history involved kind of saving the hardest stuff for last. Saving the stuff that we thought, well, obviously science doesn't tell us about that. That's clearly a subjective thing. So.
Yeah. That's Philip Goff's kind of like illustrative tool in Galileo's era, where he's just like, look, at the beginning of the scientific revolution, Galileo stripped the physical world of all its qualities. Because like he just said, look, those are in your soul. Like, so we're just going to describe the quantitative aspects of the world. And the qualitative aspect, like that's in your soul. That's like not something science is going to do. And then science went on to be very successful. They solved all the easy Sudoku puzzles, and then they're just like, oh, well, we can do this one too. And it's just like, no, it's been successful because we set it to a very narrow task. Like it can't do literally anything. Like it has a certain, like science has a certain structure. It's not like this like omniscient force that can just, or omnipotent force that can just like perform any task. Like anyway, but yeah, the vitalist objection is, I think, to put it a little bit more charitably, it's more like, a vitalist could claim that it's logically possible that a physical replica of you might not be alive, or a physical copy of like a lizard might not be alive, and that we need this further thing, to explain all the interesting properties of life. But they were wrong, and by analogy, the non-reductionist might be wrong. But it was pointed out by Chalmers. It's been pointed out by other people since then that the kind of sneaky move that's going on here is that Elan Vital was postulated to explain data, whereas consciousness is the data that needs to be explained. So it's like there's the thing that needs to be explained, and then there's the explanation. So consciousness and Elan Vital are not analogous, because Elan Vital, it's not like we observed Elan Vital and we said, how do we explain this? Like, we observed complex functions, and then we postulated this explanation for those complex functions in a vital force. But with consciousness, we just have this thing, consciousness, that needs to be explained. And that's the true disanalogy. And if you take the analogy to its like logical conclusion, then you should be an eliminativist about consciousness. You should just get rid of consciousness, because we're postulating this thing that we don't need to explain the data, consciousness. That would be taking the Elan Vital analogy to its logical conclusion. So I guess if you're an illusionist, then, go ahead and make that analogy. But everyone else is, on pretty shaky ground there. Okie dokie. So you mentioned Casper the Ghost earlier, and I wanted to talk about, okay, so I love this objection. Where are all the ghosts objection? There's a more general objection about, parapsychological phenomena like OBEs, out-of-body experiences, body switching, telepathy, telekinesis, and stuff. But the one I'm most concerned with is ghosts, because I would love it if ghosts were real. And any theory that allows me to believe that they're real gets put up to the top of the list in my book. So substance dualism at least implies that ghosts are a real possibility. And, many people throughout virtually all cultures and time periods have claimed to have experiences with ghosts in some form or another. Unfortunately, there isn't really great evidence for ghosts. There's an absence of evidence where we should see something. And for what it's worth, if ghosts were just a part of ordinary life, like if everyone, like if you see ghosts like the way that you see a deer or something, like, oh, I saw a ghost on the way to work this morning, like substance dualism, like that would pretty much settle the debate. Like substance dualism is obviously the best suited to accommodate data like that. It's maybe the only theory that could accommodate data like that. But sadly, ghosts are not a part of our ordinary experience. So the question is just, why not? Like, why isn't there better evidence for ghosts if substance dualism is true?
Yeah. So when I was in South Bend, I lived next to a witch, a gray witch, just like a morally neutral witch. She said that the ghosts were on the third floor of her house.
Did you check?
But no, I did. I was never in her house. I thought about, she did like appointments with people. I thought about doing one just to see what it was like, but I never did. I don't think she would let you go to the third floor though, because she was scared you would make the ghosts angry. But yeah, so I mean, supposing that that the ghosts weren't on the third floor, and that other people haven't really had experiences of ghosts. I guess you can think of like a couple hypotheses that would be consistent with all of the data. Maybe reincarnation is true. The ghosts just go into a new body. Maybe there's an afterlife. The ghosts go to the afterlife. Maybe your soul just stops existing. It just can't exist without a suitable brain sustaining it for whatever reason. Or maybe it continues existing, but it just can't do anything without a brain. Or even if it can do some things, it can't manifest materially or whatever. And I think all of those, you might have background reasons for accepting, one or another. As a theist, you might be able to guess which one I'm more sympathetic to. But, I think all of those, just from a pure philosophy of mind perspective, all of those could be on the table. I don't think any of those is like horribly ad hoc or something. But, maybe there's a little, again, the sort of general Bayesian point. There might be a little evidence as souls could just float around and spook people and so forth if they exist, but they don't.
And I mean, there is some evidence for this. It's not very good, but like some people do claim to have like out of body experiences. And I mean, NDEs, if you criticize NDEs, it's like antinatalists. Like there's just this horde of people who you didn't even know existed who just come down on you with force. And it's like, so some people swear that there's really great evidence for like out of body experiences and stuff, but every time I look into it, it's pretty shoddy.
Well, there's even Stephen Broad. I hope I'm saying his name correctly, but he's a notable philosopher at the University of Maryland. He might be emeritus now, but he takes this stuff very seriously. He's written some stuff. He thinks that like parapsychology is real, and that there's like a good case to be made for certain like mediumship instances. So I think he actually thinks in some of these cases of like purported contact with dead people, it's clear that something happened, and the question is just was this a real manifestation of a dead person, or was it like the latent psychic powers of the person who had the experience manifesting something? So I'm not saying that's right, but I mean, there are people who otherwise, don't seem like they're off their rockers or whatever, who take this stuff seriously. But
yeah, like I recently found out that Arthur Schopenhauer had like a vivid experience with like the ghost of his parents or something. And it freaked him out so much that he started like looking into parapsychology and into he started looking into like this kind of pseudoscience-y stuff, because he was like, his experiences like led him to believe it was just such a vivid experience of like one of his dead parents that I think it was his dead father. His mom was still alive at the time, but and he already had this well-developed theory, and he tried to say like, well, they were just like weird manifestations of the will or something. And it's like, okay, maybe there are like idealist explanations for ghosts, but obviously, like if you're just interpreting it at face value, it's it's a disembodied mind that
I've honestly, I mean, maybe I shouldn't be too hard on parapsychology and stuff, because I've never studied it.
Me neither.
Just sort of on the assumption that if it was real, probably like somebody would have told me, like it would be a bigger deal if it was like a real thing. So I don't want to put any weight on that, but
no, that's a good point. Okay, so split brain cases. And I also want to talk about like fetuses that split apart and come back together. But so split brain cases are often interpreted to mean that there are at least two consciousnesses in the body of the patient. So if you think that the mind is this absolutely simple thing without parts, then these split brain cases are kind of harder to, well, I mean, you can't interpret them in that way, I don't think, where there are like multiple consciousnesses in the body of the patient. And so anyone who's unfamiliar with split brain research, I can recommend a couple papers or podcasts, but it really appears to be the case that when you sever the corpus callosum and you have this interruption of the communication between the two hemispheres of the brain, there are at least two streams of consciousness. because you have one side that can know something that the other side doesn't know, and it can act on the basis of that knowledge. And then the other unknowing side will like confabulate an explanation as to why they just behaved in that way. So, for monists, or maybe even for property dualists, it's like, yeah, this makes sense. You have a bifurcation of the matter, so you have a corresponding bifurcation of the consciousness. But for someone who thinks that consciousness is this simple thing without any parts, how do you explain this split brain data, since it's not as if like the soul is being split into multiple souls when you cut the corpus callosum?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things to say. I mean, one is that what the right interpretation of the split brain cases is tendentious. Some people think that both halves are like independently conscious. Some people think that only one half is conscious. I think Tim Bain maybe thinks that like it switches back and forth which one is conscious. So one thing to say is that maybe substance dualists shouldn't worry so much just because it's not totally clear that the alleged problem is even a real phenomenon. Another thing, I mean, so David Hirshenov and Adam Taylor, they have a paper where they defend the claim that you could have like two centers of consciousness in one soul, even though it's mereologically simple. So maybe a dualist could say, well, okay, there are two independent centers of consciousness, even though there's just one soul. Or you could just say, well, there's a new soul that comes into being. Presumably, whatever. I mean, the explanation for that will be, whatever it is that causes there to be souls that can receive experiences when there are neural events of the right sort. While now, there are neural events of the right sort going on in the other half of the brain, but it's not part of the same system in the right way or whatever. So maybe there's a new soul that's generated. So maybe that's like the weirdest one, is if you say that there are two souls in those cases. But I don't know. I'm not sure that there's any argument against it. It just kind of seems weird.
Mm-hmm. I guess you could just add it to this cumulative Bayesian case that someone watching is making, where it's just like, well, this certainly makes more sense on materialism than dualism, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm maybe a little bit. I don't know. I've never worried quite as much as some people do about these cases. But.
So you're not with Patricia Churchland, who thinks this is just a straightforward refutation of substance dualism? No, I guess that's the first time Patricia Churchland has been wrong about something. Okay, so there's one more major objection to dualism that I want to cover. It's just the Occam's razor objection. Like we've touched on it as we've gone along a couple different times, but just we shouldn't multiply entities unnecessarily. And I can see how this wouldn't have much force for a materialist, because it's not unnecessary. Like matter as you conceive of it can't explain phenomenal consciousness, and you would say it also can't really explain identity. So, I mean, I would just point out, though, there's no contradiction between, phenomenal consciousness and the behavior, structure, and so on that characterize the physical. So why postulate two types of stuff when you only need one to get the job done? Like, a soul would just be redundant. Like there's not, there's nothing left for it to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess it will depend on whether it's correct to say that there's nothing for it to do, right? I mean, I think that there are arguments for it that show that plausibly, in order to explain our nature as subjects of experience, we have to be souls or something like souls. So that will be the theoretical work that it does. Of course, if all those arguments fail, maybe there's still this kind of phenomenal conservative argument. It just seems like you have a soul. Maybe that could still be some reason. I don't know. But suppose that doesn't work either. Then yeah, I would agree. If there's no reason to posit a soul, then you shouldn't posit one. I just disagree that there's no reason to posit one.
Right. So again, this is something that we've just kind of been like orbiting around a little bit, but what do you think about like the Russellian approach of, like here I have a quote from Bertrand Russell: "The physical world is only known as regards certain abstract features of its space-time structure, features which, because of their abstractness, do not suffice to show whether the world is or is not different in intrinsic character from the world of mind." End quote. So, physics is entirely silent on the intrinsic nature of matter. It's only ever tells us about how matter behaves. And materialists, often just kind of take it as an assumption that they know what the intrinsic nature of matter is. But dualists also make that same assumption. Like Galen Strawson points this out, where he says, like a lot of these materialists who just have nothing but contempt for Descartes, it's like kind of ironic because they buy into more or less Descartes' idea of what matter is. Like they sort of agree, whereas Russellians and panpsychists and so on, like they're just an idealist. Like we're just sort of reconceiving what matter is. But these materialists who just like make fun of Descartes, like they're in agreement with him basically about the nature of matter. So, and I guess that's how I ended up kind of where I'm at today. Why I ultimately didn't go down the dualist route, which, like I said, like I want to flesh out these alternatives. But one reason why I didn't really go down that route, it's like, well, I have direct experience with consciousness. I accept like the revelation thesis. Like I think that I know something about the essential nature of consciousness just by being conscious, and I think that has implications for these like non-physicalist arguments. But the thing that I'm just making a lot of assumptions about the nature of matter, and if I just make different assumptions, then I don't have these problems. So like I said, there's sort of this phenomenal conservative argument for the intuitive conception of matter, which is that, in its intrinsic nature, it's non-experiential. It's some concrete non-experiential stuff. But, that aside, if we make a different assumption, then we can just get rid of the hard problem of consciousness. So why wouldn't we do that? Like, yeah, it leads to like some counterintuitive places, but if you think the hard problem is like a serious problem, then rather than trying to, alter our notion of mind or just accepting dualism, you can just turn to the physical and start maybe questioning what we actually know about the physical. And like, I think that Russellian monism and structuralism does a pretty good job of like, okay, we can keep everything we know about the physical from science perfectly intact, and we can also, kind of be non-physicalists as well.
Yeah. So I think I agree in principle with the quote from Russell. It's not like panpsychism violates anything that we've learned from science or something like that. So yeah, to that extent, it's a live option. And then the question will just be, whether it's the best view for other reasons. It is certainly counterintuitive. But I guess one worry I have about it is that, there are different forms of panpsychism, of course. But I sort of think, I guess I worry about whether the versions where the quiddities, the microphysical conscious properties, it seems like the ones where they do the most work might wind up reproducing some of the problems with materialism, whereas with the ones where they do the least work, it becomes less clear what the reasons for positing them are. So I'm thinking about stuff like the combination problem, for instance. It's if somehow my experience, so I guess the combination problem in general is just the problem that, it's not like you and I would become a single conscious agent if we just stood really close together or something, right? So when you tell me, there are all these microphysical conscious beings in me, how does that explain anything about my macro level physical experience, right? you might worry that a lot of the motivations you have for rejecting reductionism about consciousness will also apply to sort of constitutive panpsychist views, where somehow my macrophysical consciousness is supposed to be nothing over and above, these microphysical consciousnesses. So if you think, say, that conceivability arguments work against reductive materialism, well, there's kind of a parallel conceivability argument that says, oh, look, isn't it perfectly conceivable that you have, all these microphysical conscious beings, in this structure and whatever, but there's no macrophysical consciousness. They don't combine in any way. And if you think, well, if that's conceivable, and if the right kind of conceivability entails possibility, then okay, well, there's no entailment between the microphysical and the macrophysical qualities, and well, then how is it helping us, to posit all these microphysical qualities? You just reinvent the explanatory gap at the level of is trying to show how these microphysical qualities give rise to the macrophysicals. Or, there are other, I think Chalmers lists like 4 or 5 different versions of combination problems. But those are broadly the sort of worries that I think I have about it. Or, insofar as panpsychists think that I am a material object, I'm a composite material object. I'm just one that has, different some different micro level properties than we thought. Then, some of the mereological worries and other sorts of identity worries that I have about ordinary physicalism will also apply to panpsychism. So those are the sorts of worries I have about panpsychism. I've certainly thought more about physicalism than I have about panpsychism. I'm open to being. I'm open in any case to being proven wrong, but I'm open to being shown that some of my objections to panpsychism just haven't been thought through enough or whatever. But those are sort of broadly the kinds of worries I have with it.
Yeah, it's interesting, because some of my friends, some of my Christian friends are dualists, and it's like whenever I start arguing about panpsychism, I go into this like attack mode on physicalism sometimes, and they're just like, I'm not a physicalist. So it's like I don't have very much experience arguing about this with dualists. But I would just say that because I was just thinking like sometimes I make the point that you just made, where it's like some of the problems for panpsychism are also problems for physicalism. So when I'm arguing with a physicalist, it's like, look, you also have these problems. It's just you've never gotten to them because you're still stuck on the hard problem. Panpsychism got around that, and now we're on to the next thing. We have new problems that, by the way, you also have. But yeah, but that point is kind of a double-edged sword. Like when you're arguing with a dualist, it's just like, well, hang on, you have this problem too. But my view as a dualist, I don't have this problem. So I guess the only, well, I have a lot of things to say about the combination problem, but I won't go into all of them. I'll just say that the explanatory gap for panpsychism is not the same as the explanatory gap for physicalism. Like, it definitely is a more surmountable gap, I would say, because some people try to take it too far and they try to say, like, well, panpsychists, they tried to avoid this problem. They just created a different version of the same problem. And it's like, it's literally no better off than physicalism. So that's not true. So I'm not denying that there's an explanatory gap, but I'm saying that we don't have to go from the objective to the subjective. We don't have some of the same worries with the hard problem. Like, they don't really carry over to the combination problem. And there are different views of combination that I think are actually pretty promising. Like Luke Roloff is a constitutive panpsychist. He just published this book called Combining Minds, where, he just really like goes for it and just like tries to lay out constitutive panpsychism and accepts all the weird implications about, how consciousness does kind of exist at all these weird levels simultaneously. And it's a very odd picture, but I think it is kind of where constitutive panpsychism leads. And I don't know. The more that you look into any view, I find, like, I don't know. well, I guess I'll just say that, like, the more you look into any view, it seems like they all entail weird things. And there is no, like, totally non-weird view of consciousness where it's just like, look, I'm only believing in things that are intuitive and have no problems. It's like, let me get out my notepad. I hadn't thought to believe in only the views that have no problems. It's like, there are no views that have that. So it's really just sort of like, pick your poison, I guess. And I guess I think that the explanatory gap for panpsychism, I just think that there have been some pretty promising developments. So I don't think it's totally unwarranted to just say, like, like I said, there's a disanalogy here between physicalism and panpsychism, where when a physicalist offers a promissory note and just says, well, let's just keep working on it and see what happens. It's like, look, I have these in principle reasons, I think, that lead me to believe that, like, more neuroscientific description is not going to solve the hard problem of consciousness. Whereas I don't really have the same very strong in principle reasons to think that constitutive panpsychism couldn't work. Like, there are certainly some reasons. Again, I'm not denying there's an apparent explanatory gap, but it seems like there's been some promising work done and some progress done, and we haven't even been working on this that long. And you've been working on the hard problem for quite a long time, so I don't think it's safe to say that, like, these are just the same problems. But also, there's this kind of last-ditch effort. So I part of the reason why I wanted to talk about dualism is because I assign maybe like a 25%-ish credence that panpsychists can't solve the combination problem without emergentism. And, like, that's where Hedda Hessel-Mørch's views come in, where she's just like, there's no way to do this, guys. Like, just move on to emergentist panpsychism. Like, you're going to have to... But like, avoiding strong emergence is the whole reason I ended up here in the first place. So it's like... So I think...
This is why I said the views on which this is what I had in mind when I talked about the views on which the microphysical properties are doing the least work. They're not serving as a reduction base or whatever, but then it becomes less clear what the reason for positing them to begin with is.
Right. Well, I think there are a couple subtle advantages that emergentist panpsychism still has over other views that invoke emergentism. Like, I think that it because she's done a lot of work developing this thing called the phenomenal powers view, where it's just like a general view of the metaphysics of causation that I think is, pretty parsimonious and I find pretty convincing. But there's also just, like, in a strict, like, theoretical virtue comparison, I think that, even if you think there needs to be some kind of brute emergence for, like, subjects, for, like, new subjects to combine, like I said, some of these problems are shared by physicalists. So physicalists have to postulate brute emergence, where phenomenal consciousness springs into existence and this, like, sort of combination occurs. So there's just, in a very strict, like, comparison sense, like, emergentist panpsychism does have, like, a slight advantage even then, even if you want to bite the emergentist bullet. But yeah, like I said, it's like, obviously, it would be ideal if we could just make constitutive panpsychism work, which I think Luke Roloff's, I think he's, like, created a pretty interesting research project. I'm still reading the book, so.
Well, I haven't read the book at all, so you have an advantage over me there.
So, I mean, if you're okay with moving on, I wanted to ask about idealism, because that's a traditional theistic view, and it's coming into... there's some new popularity, I guess. Like Bernardo Kastrup and Donald Hoffman have been popularizing it again. And yeah, it seems like a lot of theists I meet are also idealists. So why not idealism if it doesn't suffer from all the same problems as dualism?
Yeah. I guess so. In a way, I mean, I combating idealism might be the one that I've thought the very least about, because I sort of feel like, from a philosophy of mind perspective, at least many idealists and I agree about everything. We agree about our natures, and we agree that we're simple and material substances. We agree that consciousness is this irreducible property, blah, 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 blah. What we're really disagreeing about is not a philosophy of mind question. It's this other question about whether the material world exists in the common sense way or not. So to some extent, I kind of feel like, okay, well, if idealism is right, then that's fine. I'll count that as a win. But yeah, I mean, I don't, because I'm not worried so much about the in principle interaction problem or whatever. I'm not really sure that idealism avoids what I think of as the more serious worries for dualism, right? I don't think there's this big in principle problem, say, about material and immaterial objects interacting. I think there is, sort of this Bayesian worry about, why don't we find more evidence of it, or blah, 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 the various things I've said. But those sort of arise on idealism too, I think, just as much. So I'm not really sure that idealism fixes what I think of as the worrisome problems with dualism. Maybe there's some sort of general argument from, the simplicity of not having to posit mind-independent matter or whatever. And that's fine. It does seem weird to me if idealism is true that it's in every way as if there's mind-independent matter, right? Didn't have to be that way if idealism was true. I know idealists, of course, have thought about this and have answers to it. But I guess that, combined with just the fact that, idealism is kind of counterintuitive, that's why I'm not an idealist, I suppose. But I'm not totally unsympathetic to it,
Yeah. I mean, I guess they would say, like, okay, well, there is an external world. I'm thinking more of like objective idealists, where they would say there is an external world. There's a world that's independent of your mind. It's just we don't actually know the nature of that stuff. That could also be in its intrinsic nature, like something mental or some mental process. So there is like a mind independent external world that, really is real. It's just, it's not, it's just, it's like an extrinsic appearance of mentality, in the same way that, from my perspective, you're just an extrinsic appearance of mentality from the inside. And, that's very close to the sort of dual aspect panpsychist view that I hold.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I was thinking of sort of a Berkeleyan idealism, which, even a Berkeleyan idealist agrees that there is an external world. They just think, these things are all fundamentally mental. But, yeah, I haven't thought quite so much about the version that's closer to panpsychism. Yeah, maybe I should just leave it at that rather than say something half-baked.
Well, I mean, I've seen one objection to idealism. I was watching you and Ben Watkins speak on, I can't remember where it was, but you were talking and Ben mentioned, like, well, idealism has the hard problem of matter. So it's like just the hard problem of consciousness reversed. And I don't think that's a very good objection, because with consciousness, like, that's something that we directly perceive, that's this, like, this concrete reality of experience that, has emerged somehow, like, from non-experiential stuff. Whereas for idealists, they don't actually have to do anything like that. They just have to talk about the appearance of matter. Like, they just have to explain why there's an appearance of physical matter. They don't think there actually is matter in the sense that materialists mean there is matter. So it's not really the same problem. And, like, illusionists kind of, take that to its, logical conclusion, where it's like, well, we think there's phenomenal consciousness. Like, it appears to us that there's phenomenal consciousness, but there's not really phenomenal consciousness in the way that we normally think. Anyway, so I just wanted to mention that because I was watching you and Ben talk, and I wanted to defend the honor of idealists.
I can't remember enough about what Ben said to...
He's I think he's on the same sort of dual aspect page as me. I actually want to talk to him too, because I think for a while he was calling himself a non-reductive physicalist, and I cannot abide that because I actually, what do you think about non-reductive physicalism? I guess I should ask.
Yeah, I mean, it can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes it just means something sort of boring, like, you know, there are multiply realizable properties or whatever. So you can be like a functionalist and be a non-reductive physicalist just because you think, you know, having a belief is not C fibers firing. It's anything that fills the functional role of C fibers fire. Sorry, having a belief is not C fibers firing anyway. But feeling pain.
Yeah.
But
well, even that apparently that's not even right, but it's still useful. So
right. When I was an undergraduate, I always thought that C fibers were just made up, like a philosophy made up thing. Yeah. And then I learned that they're real. And I was like, yeah, I assumed somebody had just been like, whatever it is in your brain, call it C fiber. But what was I saying? Oh yeah. So sometimes people just mean something like that by non-reductive physicalism, and that's fine. But of course, that doesn't solve the sorts of problems that we're interested in here. Sometimes people mean something else, or they think that they mean something else, and then it becomes harder for me to see that the view is coherent.
That's how I feel about it, where it's like, okay, non-reductive physicalism to me almost just sounds like a contradiction in terms, and when you actually like flesh out what does that mean exactly, it's like, dude, you're just a property dualist. Like there's already a name for this position. It's like, it seems like the only real motivation for that sort of non-reductive physicalism is just desperately not wanting to be a dualist, or like trying to remain a physicalist in some way.
Yeah, it feels like sometimes people just like the words or don't like the word. You know, they just want they like physicalism.
Yeah,
physicalism. They don't like dualism.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there are some versions that are perfectly respectable, but that don't really address. You know, they're not supposed to say anything about the hard problem or whatever. Then there are other versions that I think do wind up collapsing either into property dualism or into just ordinary physicalism, and then, well, we could have just started with that.
Okay, so there are sort of these like dual aspect views though that have been getting more popular. Like Schopenhauer was some kind of dual aspect theorist, and you know, there are dual aspect idealists, there are dual aspect panpsychists, there are like dual aspect neutral monists. So like, what do you think about this like general way of approaching the mind-body problem, where it's like, no, these aren't separate properties, they're not separate substances. It's not that they're just like perfectly identical and just, you know, don't worry about it. It's like there's sort of this like ontic monism where there's only one stuff, and I feel like the only tenable versions are where it's like mental stuff, it's like mind stuff, and then there's sort of an epistemic dualism where you either are this system in question, you have to be that system, or you're observing that system from the outside. And that's where we get this appearance of dualism. It's sort of this like this access issue. It's like epistemic dualism with ontic monism. So do you think that there are any problems with that approach? Like, like you've already talked about the combination problem for panpsychism, and if you were a cosmopsychist or an objective idealist, then maybe you'd have like a decombination problem because these things like split. But what are your thoughts about that way of trying to kind of fuse mind and matter together, where something can be objectively physical from outside and subjectively mental from inside?
Yeah, well, I guess in that case, I want to know what it actually is, in and of itself.
I think they would say, like, idealists or panpsychists would say it's like consciousness in itself. Mm-hmm. But matter is what consciousness looks like from the outside.
Yeah, well, I guess if that's what we say, then I think, I would just say the stuff that I said about panpsychism and idealism.
You have to admit, it's a pretty clever way of putting mind and matter together, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm not totally convinced what the cash value is. There are many different views that go by the same, so I don't want to like overly generalize. Sometimes it feels to me like it just winds up being, idealism or materialism or whatever, just kind of described in an odd way. And, maybe the description is supposed to make it seem like a more attractive middle ground or whatever. But, really, it just winds up being the same view at the bottom. I mean, everybody agrees, of course, that there are different, that there is this sort of epistemic dualism in the sense that, you have different sorts of access to these different things. So that in and of itself doesn't seem so exciting to me. If just underlying metaphysically, you just say, well, it's just matter, or well, it's just mind. Well, then, okay, metaphysically, you just wind up, I think, incurring the same costs as you would have anyway. Though this is also one I haven't thought as much about, maybe just because sometimes I find it hard to figure out what the exact views are.
Yeah, I mean, it does have certain advantages in terms of like mental causation and like there's no interaction, like there's no interaction between mind and matter. Like it's just like you can't switch between the aspects like mid-sentence or else that'll just lead to like conceptual confusion. So yeah, I think it has advantages with causation, like it's arguably the most like it just sort of feels like a synthesis in a way of like dualism and materialism where you kind of get the advantages of both. Like in that Chalmers quote where he says like, this is sort of, there's like a Hegelian argument for positions like this where it's like it has the virtues of both and vices of neither. That's kind of where I see, and it is distinct from property dualism in that like it's totally, I mean, I think it mostly comes down to causation, like the way that there's like no interaction and between these two aspects and that sort of thing. But I think it's actually pretty interesting. I like it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly any kind of baseline monistic view will, have something maybe to say about interaction that you can't otherwise. If you think that, say, the microphysical quiddities are just the things that realize the physical structure or whatever, then that's potentially an attractive way of trying to get mental causation in there, because you can say it's not that they violate the ordinary physical order, it's that they, they're the things that instantiate it or whatever. So if that's the sort of view in question, then yeah, I agree that there's something attractive about that.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and I've been meaning to talk to you for a while. But I will, I'll link to your website in the description and in the show notes, and a couple other appearances. Like I really liked your conversation with Micah about socialism. So I'll link to those. Is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No. Thanks for having me on. I'm not, philosophy of mind is an interest of mine, but it's not really an area that I've ever like specialized in or worked in very much. I actually have some stuff under review right now that's pretty philosophy of mind related, so that's sort of changing a little bit maybe. But I should say that just a caveat.
It's sufficient grounds to reject everything you said about panpsychism, every critical thing you said.
Yeah, of course. Sorry to waste everyone's time.
Can you tell us what is under review, or is that a secret?
I think it's probably fine to describe it. One is a paper about some of the ethical consequences of different views on which we wind up containing lots of different subjects. So that's undergoing an R&R right now. And there are lots of different ways to get the view that we contain lots of different subjects. I talked about one, but Mark Johnston has a different way of arguing. Anyway, so so one is about that. The other is this paper, this co-authored paper about the psychophysical luck problem, where we argue that this, I mean, traditionally this is seen as a problem for kind of epiphenomenalist dualism. We argue that basically it's a problem for lots of people, including panpsychists, and then propose a kind of theistic explanation for it.
I think I might know what that. So Hedda Hassel-Mørch has this paper called "The Evolutionary Argument for Phenomenal Powers," where she talks about, and like ostensibly it's an argument against epiphenomenalism, but there are a lot of really interesting things in there. I think I'll put that in the show notes too. Actually, it's a really good paper. But she talks about at some point like a phenomenal fine-tuning problem for epiphenomenalists.
Yeah, it's the same.
Okay, cool.
So I mean, the worry for the epiphenomenalist is, suppose you're an epiphenomenalist, so you don't think that you think my mental states are distinct from my physical states, and you don't think that they cause any of them. Well, it's kind of weird because, like, here we are, we're talking about them. So, like, I react aversively to nasty stimuli, to like things that make me feel nasty, and I react positively to things that make me feel good. So how is it that, I say things like, there's a black patch in my visual field right now, and sure enough, there is a black patch in my visual field. It could have been, all those things could have been totally different. It could have been that there was some other random thing in my visual field, but I would still say that there's a black patch in my visual field because, my consciousness isn't causing anything, right? So this is supposed to be a problem for epiphenomenalist property dualism. Why is it that there's this harmony that exists between our actions and beliefs and so forth on the one hand, these physical things on the one hand, and our subjective experiences on the other, if the subjective experiences aren't causing any of the physical stuff to happen? Why is it that we talk about our experiences and make accurate reports and act in ways that are rational given their valence and so on? What we argue is that actually this winds up being a problem for a bunch of different views, not just epiphenomenalist property dualism. Then, as I said, we claim that this provides an argument for theism.
That's actually, I mean, so she made a similar case where she was just like, I mean, she just said it was between like epiphenomenal, like if you're an epiphenomenalist, then you've actually created a really good argument for theism, because there's like this cognitive this like phenomenal fine tuning that is basically inexplicable, because it's not just like you have a taste of like, okay, you taste coffee and you say, I like the taste of this coffee I'm drinking. It's not just that. It's like, when you feel pain, you recoil. When you feel pleasure, you like want more of it. But if your experience of pain has nothing to do with the physical action of recoiling, then that means that those, this is just epiphenomenalism. Like your experiences play no causal role in the chain of action here. And the reason that's a problem is because our experiences are systematically correlated with adaptation. So like William James made this argument, where he just said like, look, things that are adaptive are pleasurable, like sex or, not being injured or something, like just being of a sound body, like eating is pleasurable. Whereas things that are maladaptive, like, sticking your head underwater for too long is deeply displeasurable. And he points out, like, if it was really pleasurable to stick to, suffocate yourself underwater, then, you'd be taken out of the gene pool. And it just seems like your experiences are the incentives for what you're doing. Like it feels good to eat, that's why you eat. And it can also explain with problems with like overeating or something like that. And with, it's like suffocating is deeply unpleasant, so you don't like stick your head underwater for long periods of time. But for an epiphenomenalist, those experiences are not incentives. Like there's no, and plus they're not causally, like there's really no reason to expect that a feeling of pain would be associated with drowning if the feeling has literally nothing to do with the drowning. It's like the behavior and the experience are totally separable. So we should just thank our lucky stars that it's not, excruciatingly painful to breathe air and pleasurable to stick your head underwater, because you would behave in exactly the same way. Like, even if, having sex felt like smashing your hand with a hammer, like, you would still just be helplessly doing it because your experiences have nothing to do with your behavior. So if that's the case, which, it is for epiphenomenalism, then you kind of have you created this whole new fine-tuning problem. And maybe you should believe in God, because it's a pretty lucky, fortunate accident that that's not the case.
Yeah, she's one of a couple people who have actually brought up this, maybe this is an argument for theism point. So Adam Potts says the same thing. We're just unusual in that we don't, everybody else kind of says that and is like, yeah, sure. Brings it up and then laughs it off. But we don't laugh it off, and we also try to show that it's actually much harder to avoid a problem than a lot of other people have realized. It affects many views and not just epiphenomenalists, probably.
That's a great move in philosophy of mind. Just take reductios that people make and then just bite the bullet and then make the same. There are arguments for panpsychism that you can draw from history where it's just Hume made arguments for panpsychism. All these different people made arguments for panpsychism and then said, well, that can't be true. So, but they're actually pretty decent arguments sometimes. So, but yeah, I think she does just mention that and then says well, obviously, if you want to be pushed over that cliff, then that's your business. But, we have to consider, the whole paper, the whole rest of the paper is establishing, the phenomenal powers view, which she takes to be an alternative that doesn't suffer from the problems. But yeah, I'm interested to see what you wrote there, to see if her kind of dual aspect panpsychism suffers from the same problems as she laid out earlier.
Yeah, I can send you a draft if you're interested.
Yeah, no, I'd love that. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time again. It's been a pleasure. And I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.